Hello, everyone. Thank you for making time to join us. Welcome. And really happy to have you guys in this third series of webinars in which we are discussing the soon-to-come launch of the African Healthcare Funders Forum. My name is Frank Aswani. I'm the CEO of AVPA based in Johannesburg. We're really excited to have you today join us with two super guests who I think are going to excite us with some interesting stuff as they share their experiences with what they're doing to contribute to the healthcare space on the continent. And as usual, we want to kind of get to know each other as you come in. So what I want to just make sure some broad rules, use the chat for any questions you may have, but we'll also share with you a very interesting tool to engage with the webinar. So I just want all of you, first of all, just get your cell phones ready because we are going to introduce you to a tool that we'll be using quite a lot in the course of the webinar. So Abu, you can just bring Slido up so people can get a sense of what it looks like and they can use the QR code. So if any of you, please have your phones out. We're going to be a bit more interactive and make this a bit more of an engaging session. But really glad to have everyone here. Nice to see some familiar names. Kenneth, welcome. Thank you so much for coming, joining us. Faith, really great to see you. Obakeng, who I met last week, great to have you here as well. So if you have your slide, your phone open, please point your camera to the QR code, and that should take you to Slido, or you can join through the link that Abby has shared on the chat. And I want you, in whatever language you speak, tell us what good health means in your language. And you say good health, and in brackets, put the language in which you're referring to. So just use the Slido QR code, and then let's see what diversity we have in the room. Oh, there's someone who's speaking Lingala. That's excellent. I'd love to know who that is. I'm a big fan of Congolese music. So anyone who speaks Lingala would be very good friends. Welcome. Gesundheit. Where is that from? What language is that? So please, how do you say good health in your language? We'll do this for another couple of seconds. And please get used to the Slido thing because we're going to use it a couple of times during the course of the webinar. Oh, Cantonese, good. Igbo, nice. You can see the slight variations of Kiswahili. So Sarah, if you are not multilingual, this is a good chance for you to get up to speed with with healthcare terminology from across the world.
Yeah, I'll make some screenshots and then practice.
Exactly. No, that's yeah, this is a really good chance for you to engage that. Okay, awesome. So that's really cool. Abu, can we have the second? Is there any? So this gives you a sense of the diversity we have in the room. This is what I love about an African audience. We really bring together people from across the continent solving the same issues. So Abu, can we go to the next poll? Just want to check and see how the diversity of the room is. Which country are you dialing in from? Once again, use Slido. Tanzania, good. Hong Kong, Singapore. Awesome. We've got people dialing in from all over the place. African healthcare is a place of great interest. Fantastic. Nigeria, excellent. Botswana. South Africa, good. Another 30 seconds and then we can get going. Okay, and then I want just to help thank you, this is really good. Belgium, excellent. So we've got a good spread of people. And then finally, I want to give the speakers a sense of who's in the room from a funding perspective, because a big chunk of what we're going to be talking about is just what's happening in healthcare financing. So Abu, can you put the third slide up? I think Sawan and Sarah, this will really help you get a sense of who's in the room. Which of the following describes your work? Are you a recipient, as in an implementer? Are you a provider of capital? Are you a government agency? Do you provide, support services to this healthcare space? Or do you work for a government agency? So we'll take another 30 seconds to do this. Good diversity of people in the room. So Sarah and Sawan, as you can see, there's a pretty good mix of people, majority being funders. So that's a good sense that we are all keen to see how we can do this a lot better going forward. So this is really cool to see. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Really great. We're just warming up to get started. So what I want to do is first of all, just get to the crux of what we're trying to discuss today. This is a problem that is core to what we as AVPA believe in trying to support Africa's growth and progress by trying to see how do we address some of our SDG financing gaps. And at a very high level, the continent needs between $500 billion to $1.2 trillion annually to close our SDG financing gap. And this was all pre-COVID. We know COVID added easily another $1.7 billion, trillion globally on the burden of the SDGs. So we are really trying to see how we can tighten and close the spaces and gaps left by the need to address some of the big healthcare issues on the continent. We also recognize in the context of where we're coming from, healthcare and probably education have been very much viewed as social good sectors, and most affected by two things: one, declining aid, and also governments not having that much money to spend on social investments. And so we saw during the end of his tenure, President Trump cut back USAID funding. The UK government did the same, and increasingly more and more aid to Africa is coming in seeking impact and not seeking the traditional, aid opportunities that we've gotten used to in the past. So on the back of that, this is what we're trying to do, is to try and see how can we, where else can we source capital from? And the private sector becomes a very viable place for us to go to, because your capital markets globally are sitting at about $300 trillion. So this program, the African Healthcare Funders Forum, which is very generously supported by Boehringer Ingelheim under their Making More Health initiative, in partnership with the Shock and Social Capital Innovation. We're super glad to be trying to see how else can we mobilize different sources of funders and investors to support this initiative on the continent. So the forum will be split into two parts. The first part will be an impact investing training program that will aim to upskill and capacitate African investors on impact investing competencies. This becomes very importantly, especially when we're trying to see how we bridge the gap left by the lack of aid and government funding by crowding in private capital. And we're deliberately trying to see how we can bridge traditional philanthropy and private capital and play in this middle space where we're blending finance. We're looking at creative structures like revenue share models, outcome-based financing. And so that first initial part, which is about 3 months of a training program, will look to address and upskill everyone around those really new and critical skills that we need to mobilize capital for impact. After that initial program, then the second part of the forum comes in, which is a lifelong community of practice, where we deliberately try and keep the investors in one group, a community of practice where they will be seeking to collaborate, co-invest, shared deal flow, and shared other types of opportunities, including non-financial opportunities that come our way, all in supportive of driving healthcare impact across the continent. So for today, I'm really glad to have two really distinguished guests with us today. Super excited to be here with Sarah, who is the Global Strategic Finance Lead, Public Health at Johnson & Johnson. Her 20 years of healthcare industry experience include leading market shaping and new venture building efforts across medtech, health tech, and early stage pharmaceutical vehicles in global markets. She's a solution developer with a passion for impact. Sarah is an active board member and venture partner. She was awarded the first ever Corporate Entrepreneur Accolade for Corporate Entrepreneurs, LLC in 2009, the Rising Star Award by Global Corporate Venture in 2016, and served as the healthcare subgroup lead of the International Venture Club Tech Tour. Sarah has a Master's of Business Administration in Entrepreneurship from Babson College in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and a postgraduate degree in Global Business from the University of Oxford in the UK. Sarah, your CV reads super impressive. Welcome.
Thank you. Unmute myself. Sorry. Thanks, Frank.
Yeah, your CV reads really well. And Sawan, who's got a very interesting story. As he calls himself, a numbers guy. He's the founder of Jacaranda Maternity in Kenya, an NHIF accredited provider for maternity and gynecological procedures. They provide high quality, affordable, client-centric, respectful maternal healthcare, pediatric gynecology, and family care assistance at their family care maternal centers. Sawan holds a master's in business administration from INSEAD and previously co-founded Market Finance, a marketplace that enables small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs in India, to get access to quick, transparent, and cost-effective funding. So, Sawan, let me start with I'm just curious. Are you just a serial entrepreneur? Are you just one of those people who's ever trying to solve problems?
If you'd asked me, sorry, it's really nice being here, Frank, but I think if you'd asked me about 5 or 6 years ago, I was just trying to pursue the money more than anything else, which is why I think, my transition from a bean counter to a banker and then moving into the fintech circle was kind of where I was following the money. But the kind of movement towards health has been a little bit more, I'd say more than that, because initially it started off as my way back into Kenya, because I'd been out of Kenya for about 5 years post INSEAD setting up my startup in India, and then gradually has become a love affair to try and promote better healthcare outcomes, but at the same time kind of the pursuit of this holy grail, which is now starting to fascinate me more than ever before, which is how do you balance a sustainable business venture that can generate good returns to its investors, whilst at the same time tackling lower end of the pyramid related health problems that basically somebody who is in a higher income stream can easily afford to do so. So it's just become this really, really interesting pursuit, and kind of trying to get to the answer has been a struggle. It's been fascinating. It's been thought-provoking. It's been hair-pulling, and I think that's what it's kind of moved into right now.
Okay, so and tell me what inspired you to get into healthcare? I mean, you came from fintech into healthcare. You're not a doctor. You don't have a medical background. What kind of brought you to this space?
Honestly, I think you'll find that there is no real story. It's more serendipity than anything else. I was, after founding Market Finance in India, it was more a love affair. So my wife or my girlfriend at the time happened to live in Kenya. I wanted to get back to Kenya where I could actually end up putting down roots and hopefully starting a family. So I was looking for an exit. I was looking for a way out. And I thought to myself, well, there's some interesting, things that I could get on with in Kenya. One was had the option of having another startup, which anyone who's done startups understands that it can be an intensely painful affair. And after having done 3 startups, 2 of which had failed miserably and 1 which had performed relatively well, I think I was kind of crossing that off the list very, very quickly. The second option was buying an existing going concern, kind of scaling it and hopefully selling it off in 7 to 10 years to a private equity fund or a strategic investor. But at the time that I came back to Kenya, 2017, 2018, valuations were through the roof. And I kind of started understanding that there needed to be a better time in the future that could particularly take place. So the final option was, could I find myself in a C-suite position in a rapidly growing startup that I saw potential in, that I could actually, use my skills from finance and actually apply them. And it just so happened that Nick Pearson, who is actually the founder of Jacaranda Maternity, was looking for somebody who had the business and the finance acumen, and I guess some sort of startup, approach to really kickstart Jacaranda Maternity's journey into a social for-profit enterprise. Jacaranda Maternity in 2017 had changed from a not-for-profit status to a for-profit institution, and there were many reasons behind that. The main one was that donor funding had been drying up significantly in Kenya, particularly in maternal and child health, but also that at the same time, our one little hospital in Kahawa West at that time was starting to get a lot of institutional impact investor attention. And the challenge that many of these investors had put out to Nick at the time was that, hey, you guys are doing amazing stuff in terms of providing quality health outcomes at an affordable price, but the challenge is there is no sustainable business model and you need to turn it around. I remember we were doing 54 cents of revenue for every $1 of costs when I joined. And then in 2019, when we had our first Series A, that had turned the other way around. So we were doing about $1.30 revenue for every $1 of costs incurred. So that's basically it. The pursuit of love brought me back, and then pure coincidence that I found Jacaranda, and 5 years later, I'm still there.
Excellent, excellent. Sarah, I want to bring the audience in on one particular question, but before I go there, how did you end up in healthcare? What was your journey? What inspired you to get into healthcare? And you could have gone into any sector, quite frankly. Why did you end up in healthcare?
I guess I don't have the most interesting response to that either. It was also chance. I didn't necessarily wake up one morning and decide I had a passion for the space. It was family. I had my brother-in-law at the time was doing a lot of work in the space, and I was really focused on commercial and entrepreneurship. And he said, we really need more talent like this in the corporate sector in healthcare. Why don't you think about coming into health? And I thought, okay. So yeah, he introduced me to a few people. I had done another job. Before that, I was building a business out for a separate corporate that was working more in occupational health and safety. So sort of tangential, but I was building out a whole new business unit for them at 21 or 22 years old. And then, I got recruited. So with the success of that, I got recruited by like 3 or 4 of the big, large pharmaceutical companies at the time saying, come over and build out businesses for us. So when I came into the corporate sector in healthcare, it was really with the focus of, can you take new technology and build it into new businesses for us? So that was really how I entered the sector.
Okay, we have a lot to thank your brother-in-law for, I must admit. Before we go into anything, Abu, do you want to set up the next slide question? I want to engage the audience on very pertinent subject to what we're about to discuss today. But I want to get the view from the audience first, what they think about this subject. Abu? Hope Slido behaves. There you go. For those of you who are joining us, please take out your cell phones and please use the camera to follow through on that QR code. We're going to be using Slido in the course of this webinar. But I want to get a question about just your issue around the challenges around healthcare. So Abu, if you can put up that question, that'll be awesome. So to the audience, for the next 30 seconds, let's see what your responses are. Another 15 seconds. Thank you very much for those who submitted their answers. So, Sarah, when you look at this, it looks like inadequate financing and lack of implementation capacity are almost neck to neck. What's your reaction? And what does your experience tell you?
Yeah, I mean, the first thought I have, just very off the top of the head, when you see a lack of inadequate financing, is more that we need to move away from the donor capital as being one-off philanthropic, tranches of capital, to, I think, what Sawan mentioned and where Jacaranda is heading to looking for solutions that create engines of capital and sustain financing. And that moves away also from, I think, traditional venture capital or some investment time horizons. Development finance is one tool that does long-term investing, but we don't want debt. We don't want to layer countries or companies with massive amounts of debt to get after their solutions, which tends to be one of the long-term capital tools that gets used most often. So how do we bring in impact capital and blended finance solutions to be able to support healthcare goals in Africa for longer time horizons? And I think that's really where the market I see is going. And it needs a lot of leadership, and it needs more players at the table pushing that agenda. And I think with that, we can really start to help countries and companies reach proper tipping points where they can, achieve better sustainable finance goals.
Okay, Sawan, your reaction? You look at lack of financing, and then, funny enough, actually, there's probably not enough of you developing point number 3, innovating around healthcare solutions. Your reaction to the poll?
Yeah, I agree massively with points 1 and 2. And in addition to what Sarah has very, very well said, I think healthcare financing also moves, is the piece about healthcare financing that's also really important is that ultimately your end consumer is the person that actually needs to pay for that particular service or product. And, there's a whole bunch of questions around that, which is ultimately the ability and willingness to pay for services and products, the element of adverse selection, the question about countries onboarding some form of public health insurance, which all boils down to the same thing. Are you able to pay for services and products, or do you go down the route of a completely free kind of healthcare system, which also has its costs and ultimately has a system where a payer is actually financing facilities like ours. So I think that that's a really, really important challenge, unless you're able to get people to spend more or be somewhat provided with a free healthcare service. That's going to be a big, big challenge in itself. And there should be some form of innovation and thought process around that. Second piece, lack of implementation capacity. I think that's also true. Technical capacity building, both by way of, from a facility perspective, by way of equipment, as well as kind of education, so that you can get clinicians to provide healthcare and fulfill Africa's healthcare goals, is something that is very, very low right now and needs a lot of attention on. And that can be coupled with the question, which is, Frank, what you've talked about, Afrocentric healthcare innovations. How do you apply innovations around the pieces of education so that capacity can be built, around equipment so that capacity can be built, and have centers such as Jacaranda actually implementing it and making sure that there are partnerships that can allow for a lower cost of care to be provided to people, so that it doesn't form such a massive healthcare financing burden to countries around Africa who are already strained post-COVID as it is.
Sawan, you said a lower cost of care. In your view, and Sarah, I'd love your thoughts about this, are profit and purpose mutually exclusive, especially when it comes to healthcare? It's a very emotive subject. People feel you can make money in other sectors. Do you think we should have a different view of healthcare, or do you think we should treat healthcare like any other sector, where we can still support sustainable market-based solutions that are generating some profit, but also then offering a real big service and serving a gap that the governments can support?
My immediate knee-jerk reaction is I think it should have the piece about profit included. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I think that there is and if I'm saying I wouldn't be here, I can pretty much guarantee that many healthcare innovators around the same space are working towards things whereby they're trying to figure out how to lower costs of healthcare so that the masses can actually start affording it. But that ultimately also leads to revenue generation. And, I don't necessarily think that we should be removed from other sectors whereby the flow of capital and the flow of intellect has greatly been enabled by the pursuit of both profit as well as purpose. And I think healthcare is also, very, very similar. So, in my opinion, I think you can get to both. There's just a couple, well, I'd say a lot more wheels or a lot more kind of circles that need to kind of come together for that to take place. But, it feels like we are moving painfully in that direction.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, I do think in every environment, in every economy and country, there is always a role for pure philanthropic capital, right? So that doesn't need to go away, but it can't be the predominant way that healthcare is delivered in a country. And it can't be the predominant funding source unless it is designed in a way that it creates a sustainable engine of philanthropic capital, where you're using just, a nest egg approach on the philanthropic capital to spit out a dividend or a yield, and then that dividend never dries up, right? If you can find ways to create creative ways to turn philanthropic capital into more of an engine, that those are ideas that we chew on, or I chew on daily, about how to kind of use philanthropic capital better. And then with the purpose piece, I think it does have to be purposeful, but it has to be also fit for purpose. So again, I think there's a lot of work that's done with a lot of good intention, but particularly, in the environment, in the region of the world where we're talking about today, the fly in, fly out model, is not it. And we still see a lot of philanthropic capital money going into those types of initiatives, which I do believe all have good intentions, and they do have, short-term impact. Which is great. But we need to really build capacity locally, and we need to build, expertise locally. And so fly in and fly out can be a supplement. But using, telemedicine, telesurgery, histopathology, things that kind of supplement local expertise, local, capacity, I think are the ways we can also help increase that implementation force. And so fit for purpose for me, it's also really important. It's not anymore just about like, hey, I flew in and did a good job and left. I think those models really are waning in attractiveness.
Okay, so excellent. So Benjamin asked a question. Many of us have ideas as upcoming NGOs develop or are in the pipelines to help organizations, but which lack financing or grants to keep. And so that becomes a barrier, from, if I understand Benjamin's question properly, is that lack of financing is a major barrier to funding some of the ideas that African innovators may be coming up with. But from your experience, I mean, Sarah, you being on the supply side of capital, I want you to go faster, and Sawan, you being on the demand side of capital, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges and opportunities in healthcare financing in Africa?
I mean, the short answer for me would be that, so the challenges are also the opportunities. The challenges are though, so, point taken in the question in the chat. It's a difficult position to be in, and I'm not saying that there's an easy answer to that, especially without any context. There's no blanket response to that. I do think, you hear people talking about capital stack approaches. The private sector, in short, has to get more involved in this story. It's been a long-term, publicly financed, donor country financed agenda. And there are opportunities for the private sector also, in private philanthropic capital and private foundation capital, especially with all of the movement coming now with impact related weighted accounts and impact finance and impact reporting requirements, for major players across the globe, both in the East and the West, to bring more of their capital to the table to help create blended solutions where the, first chunk of the timeline and horizon may be catalytic and not-for-profit. And then, but there's a total roadmap there that eventually, once milestones are hit and tipping points are reached, then the commercial capital is able to come in and help pick up and supplement. So I do think bringing those kind of financial roadmaps, and all the stakeholders along that roadmap together at the outset, when you're at the point of catalytic and philanthropic sort of capital to start with, is really important. And using and making sure the private sector comes to the table to join those discussions is what we're trying to push as well. We're using all the capital tools that we have, whether they be commercial grants, investment equity, R&D finance, access finance, implementation, technical support, in kind. When I look at our portfolio, I try to look at all the different tools that we have. What are all the different sources of capital and expertise that we can bring to the table? And then how do we layer them in to help, fund solutions, not just have like a one-off tool and create silos around that. And I think the entire market is moving towards that in the private sector and looking through that lens now. So I'm hoping that if we continue down that path, we'll start to be able to see more opportunities and more solutions for folks like people in the chat to find, the capital that they're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, and I know there's a lot of terminology may not be familiar to everyone. So if you do hear words that are coming out of this conversation, this is a safe space. Please just ask in the, what does blended finance mean, or what does catalytic capital mean? We'll happily try and unpack some of those, because this is what we need to be doing. We need to be trying to simplify and make sure that we are all on the same page in terms of understanding some of this stuff that we're talking about. Sawan, from your side, just as someone who's running a business trying to raise money, what have you experienced?
Okay, well, I think that having gone through the fundraising journey myself, I think there's an awful lot right now that just depends on pure luck. I'm just drawing from our own experience. Despite having all these institutional investors who were circling around, it actually took a pure day of luck sitting next to a Japanese venture capital fund at one of these forums, striking up a conversation, and then ultimately that leading to our Series A. That doesn't negate the fact, though, that there's an awful lot of work that philanthropic capital did help with laying the foundation for Jacaranda Maternity. For example, we've been seeded by philanthropic capital that is, I'd call it philanthropic capital because it's based on revenue royalty type loans. So essentially what the investors are saying is that you only need to repay according to the revenues and the way your revenues ramp up. Sure, at later stages when you're generating revenue at a very, very high rate, we're going to benefit as a consequence of it. But ultimately, we are supporting you in the initial phases when revenue is very, very difficult to eke out when you're trying to validate a particular business model. We've also benefited from technical assistance, which is, hey, after our Series A, we'd wanted, there'd be a whole bunch of kind of ideas that we'd want to incubate or test. And the likes of J&J, Impact Ventures, the likes of Boehringer Ingelheim and Ashoka through the Making More Health Accelerator actually helped us through the journey. But, for somebody who's starting out and saying, I'm starting a business and I'm doing a startup, the landscape is really, really hard to navigate. I don't think we'd be able to sit here and have this conversation if it wasn't for the fact that it began with an absolute stroke of luck, which was that conversation that led to one investor, one VC fund saying, we want to go ahead and take a risk with Jacaranda Maternity. And then we had money follows money. So then we had other institutional investors coming on board, which we are very, very grateful for. But the challenges for healthcare startups who want to try and test and validate, there's just so many in East Africa. You're faced with USD dollar appreciation in this market right now. So, you either have investors who are purely VC related, looking for an absolutely enormous rate of return coming through, or you have those who've made their bed with looking at the valley of death. So when I'm talking about value of death, you're talking about genuinely those who are on $1 a day. That doesn't leave much for those who are testing a healthcare venture that is genuinely trying to make revenue and is focused on the $7 a day per capita that now statistics are pointing towards, because that's where you have the ability to generate revenue and become sustainable, whilst at the same time and prove to have a rate of return to your investors, as well as at the same time kind of also provide a level of impact. And that's kind of where we are. And anybody who's playing in that field, it's very, very difficult to find people. And I also need to mention that sometimes ticket sizes make it even worse, because you sit there and unless you're going gung-ho for a $20 million raise on a $40 million enterprise value or whatever you want to go for, you're not going to get the larger investors very interested if you're going to raising $1 or $2 million. And at the same time, you've got then the seed investors or the foundations who are happy to write $150,000 tickets, but you need an awful lot of them in order to kind of get you to your $1 or $2 million raise. So even that is a challenge right now. The opportunities, I think, are as a consequence of the challenges. And I think Sarah's right, where there is a blended finance kind of landscape that's slowly starting to come up and start running. An example where we've benefited is Merck for Mothers, who has provided us with, once again, a test grant to prove and validate something that we're doing in order for us to receive further funding from the likes of DFC on the debt side. So there are, pockets of these sort of investors around who are willing to kind of come together and say, okay, we need a first loss because we need to understand that it's exceptionally difficult to try and prove something in Africa. And we need to give the entrepreneur the leeway of making mistakes as they're trying to figure their way out, because the road is just too long and the timelines are extremely long. So we need to give them that benefit to be able to do it. But it's very, very challenging right now.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely correct. And one of the things, Sawan, that comes out as we talk about, and Sarah, to your issue, the point you made around challenges and opportunities, I think we're truly blessed to be in a continent with so many challenges. A few years ago, it would have been the glass would have been half empty. Today, the glass is actually half full. As an impact player, there's no place you want to be than in Africa, because this is where you have the best opportunities to test new models, new products, new services, because our problems are suddenly really good labs and test kits for trying out new interventions. And I always tell people, if what you do works in Africa, you can scale it into anywhere in the world, basically. So this is a pretty good case in point for us to call Africa the global sandbox for impact in many ways. And Sarah, just coming to a question about I think it was Matthew who asked whether there are any concrete examples of blended finance for health which has been scaled in Africa. Do you have any you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sawan was right in saying that, blended finance for health is pretty early space, right? Climate, you'll see a lot of really good examples, right? Of green bonds and rhino bonds and I don't know, all kinds of stuff in the climate space has really led the way with blended finance. And then in health, you've seen things like social success notes in India or impact bonds, which take an inexorbitant amount of time to set up. And then use blended finance, though, to kind of get after a sustainable result. But there are things within, for those who are just looking for opportunities that I can give concrete about, the roles we play. But, you can read the USAID blended finance roadmap. You see, they are really trying to figure out how to use sort of public sector capital and combine it then with private sector capital. So the need for the private sector to come to the table, particularly post-pandemic. I mean, it was already on the agenda, and then the pandemic hit, and it just became even more apparent how necessary it was for private sector to play a bigger role. But these are not things that governments can solve on their own, which has been a really nice, in some cases, door opener for bigger conversations about how we can get after blended finance together. So the Medical Credit Fund is also, I think, sort of an interesting example that does a climate and a health angle on blended finance. We're working with the Healthcare Finance Coalition, which on an unannounced fund at the moment that we're in the process of diligencing, but that would be a complete blended finance instrument with a mix of catalytic and commercial capital with a much longer timeline than a traditional fund to support initiatives on the African continent, in particular related to supply chains and universal healthcare coverage. So those are things that are happening. And then sort of I mentioned also, and Sawan mentioned this with Merck for Mothers. When we make investments now, or we give grant making capital out into the market as J&J, we're connecting that conversation. So these things used to be very different, where it was you have your impact capital and you have your commercial finance, even if it's sub-commercial returns, it's impact finance. And then you had your grant making facilities and your philanthropic engines and your foundations, and they sort of acted independent of each other and used their capital tools in different ways. And now we're finding more and more that there are a lot more opportunities for us to use our grant making or our catalytic capital to cover those initial first loss periods in opportunities that we may think are going to be eventually, if people can fund them, can be interesting commercial investment, even if it's sub impact, commercial investment opportunities down the line. And so we definitely want to play more of a role there and using our own capital tools to create blended finance opportunities. So there are a lot of, for entrepreneurs in particular, also, There are a lot of new resources. There's adventure finance if you're looking for good reading. I mean, that's one of the biggest, hottest topic books on the market, I would say right now. I mean, I am an Oxford alum, so I am sort of plugging someone who's an Oxford author, but, you know, I think she's fantastic and really done a good job of sort of mapping out all different types of tools for entrepreneurs outside of the standard tool set that are available, that are out there, that you can look into to kind of take advantage of where this blended finance market is going and give you some really good success stories. So in a nutshell, you know, with the time that we have today, I would say like those are the areas that I would Prosper Africa. I mean, lots of things are happening out there now. So those are some tips I would give to try to take a look at what's happening in blended finance in health, although it's still early.
Yeah. And you know, the joy about this thing is blended finance and impact investing is still so nascent that we're all learning. There's no tall dwarf. We're all kind of getting into this space and really trying to get our heads around what this means. And I keep saying again, there's no better place for you to come and try some of your learnings and lessons than in Africa. And so that's why part of the forum, we're super excited about the front end part, which will be really about helping people understand this whole impact investing blended finance space. And please, if you're thinking about joining the forum, you don't need to be a finance expert to be part of that forum and to benefit from the program. And we're very lucky today to have Mark Cheng from Social Innovations Circle, who's going to be leading the curriculum around the training program. So Mark, do you want to speak very briefly to what people should look for in the curriculum before I go back to the speakers, and what the forum broadly presents as an opportunity, but especially for people who are coming new and fresh into this space, what should they expect?
Okay, thank you, Frank. And thank you for the opportunity to come in and just quickly talk a little bit about the curriculum on the forum. And we're delighted to have Sawan and many other CEOs joining us on that forum as well. So it's going to be very interactive. And the idea is to bring CEOs together who are actually raising capital and putting capital to work in conversation with funders who are looking to deploy capital and learning about new ways of doing so. And blended finance is very much at the heart of the curriculum and what we'll be exploring. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So we've been working with many entrepreneurs in the the AVPA network, the Ashoka network, for many years. And one of the things that's become very apparent is that there is a mismatch between the type of capital which entrepreneurs on the ground tell us they need, which is, a lot of it is working capital. A lot of it is things like bank debt, for example, and capital to fund early stage projects, which are high risk, and the type of capital which is actually available in the market, which tends to congregate around either grant funding or pure equity, right? And I think there are a lot of very natural reasons why that is the case. It's just, a lot of the funders are from outside Africa. They want to fund in US dollars, and so it's less comfortable for them to move into areas like working capital and bank debt. And so that is one of the reasons why a lot of entrepreneurs are turning to blended capital and blended finance as a way of trying to, find a way to put the pieces of the jigsaw together. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be exploring a number of case studies in the forum of how people are able to use things like credit guarantees, for example, from philanthropists in order to be able to unlock working capital finance, of the kind which is needed, or how we can bring venture philanthropists in to de-risk the early stage of a healthcare venture so that equity investors can come in at a slightly later growth stage, which is where the majority of the capital wants to play. And so if we can lead a series of discussions around that, I think that's going to be very helpful for the grant funders who are in the room, who want to explore, what are the most leveraged ways for them to use their capital. And at the same time, for the equity investors to be aware of what options are out there, which enable them then to invest in a Series A or a Series B, right? And so very much that the conversation will be around how can we use leverage finance, blended finance in a smart way in order to be able to unlock these forms of finance. And we are seeing some examples of that taking place, but not enough. And so we want to draw case studies, not only from Africa, but from around the world, that will actually present and discuss this and showcase that. So that will be a series of discussions that we'll be trying to foster during the forum. We'll also be inviting a number of healthcare experts to present on specific areas of that are African-centric around the challenges of investing in African healthcare ventures on the ground. For example, how do we deal with the fact that there is a very clear split between where healthcare is predominantly provided, which is urban centers, and where the significant mass of the population for patients is, which is rural areas and the last mile. So that's one big gap that's there. Another big gap is in the number of doctors, nurses, and medical workers that are available relative to the population size. So a lot of the solutions that we'll be looking for will be around how can we rapidly upskill medical workers, and how can we get their services out to a broader population than traditional healthcare models might be working with. So we're going to have a series of expert-led discussions, and I'm hoping that Sarah and Sawan will join us for those and indeed help us lead those as we explore some of these very specific issues on the ground about what's happening with healthcare infrastructure.
Thank you, Mark. And one of the things that I like to do in working people like Mark, as Sawan, for example, is many of us as Africans have lived the problem. We're best placed to live the solution. So we do really want to be deliberate about supporting more African inventors and innovators and entrepreneurs through the journey of supporting, of creating services and solutions to address some of our needs. And we should not be hearing things like what we've heard from Sawan saying, it was by luck. We should try and minimize or eliminate luck. We should try and drive intent. How can we be deliberate about creating intentional connections that actually give people like Sawan access to capital and the right type of capital at the right stage of growth of the respective businesses. So that's the kind of stuff we're hoping this forum will be able to achieve. And it's not, we've been trying to see whether there's any other this kind of forums across the world. This is probably one of the first. So I'm a big believer in we as Africans being able to, as I said, using our issues or our challenges as opportunities to test new approaches. And we've got a lot to teach the world from this forum. So really looking excited to this. Sawan, very briefly, your fundraising journey, has it been good? Has it been tough? What's been like? What has worked? What advice would you give people who are looking to raise money?
Okay. So our Series A, I think, went really, really well. And I think that was a world pre-2019 where, for some, Kenya and East Africa was growing in terms of the amount of institutional capital that was available for healthcare. So I know I've said that it began with a stroke of luck, but once that stroke of luck happened, I think the sort of ability to show both positive unit economics and profitability and say that we could possibly scale, it was really, really important from an institutional investor perspective. And so whilst at the same time providing high quality care to the peri-urban neighborhoods that we actually serve. Then COVID hit. And I think that, we really kind of, we were very optimistic initially that we were going to be able to expand. The Series A was for an initial $3 million raise to expand us to 2 more hospitals, which is what we have done. But it did put the brakes on as we kind of sat back to try and observe what how our business would perform. Luckily for us, our business did really, really well as more and more mothers than ever before started streaming to our hospital. But it did put the brakes on expansion. We're now on the verge of having 3 hospitals up and running, which is great news. But so it kind of leads me to the conversation about our Series B and all the challenges that come by showing that you're a brick and mortar company that's looking at expansion. Mark has heard me has heard me complain vociferously about this, where it just feels like if you've already succeeded in a Series A, you've gotten institutional semi-commercial terms on board, that many investors are now looking at more tech and more tech enabled than anything else. We kind of sit as tech enabled, and we certainly, love the fact that tech helps us improve our operations, improves how we deliver high quality care, improves how we scale, improves our unit economics. But the challenge is that we still need to deliver babies in maternity centers where there's a level of capital expenditure. We have to buy equipment. We have to, have brick and mortar that's ready to accommodate for that particular service. And for some reason, as I scan the landscape right now, what we're finding is that people are moving away from that and saying, well, it's just not sexy enough, which is kind of interesting, because in an environment where you're just looking for bread and butter revenue, you can't get any better than maternity care, especially solid maternity care where people are willing to pay for services. So it's become challenging as a consequence of that. And once again, I go back to our ticket sizes. When you are not quite hit profitability and you're raising for smaller ticket sizes, even though it's a Series B, you tend to get overlooked by the larger investors out there. But once again, you're not quite big enough, but you're also not small enough to attract the smaller investors who are happy to write the $150, $1,000 checks. So it's been a bit of a catch-22 situation. I mean, that being said, we have some incredible Series A investors, J&J, Impact Ventures being one of them, Swedfund, which is the Swedish DFI, being the other one, and thirdly is the Japanese healthcare fund, which is Africa Healthcare Master Fund. And then that's on the equity side, and then on the debt side, we have UBS Optimus Foundation that has provided us with a very cool social impact bond that the interest rate, which fluctuates based on certain clinical and social impact outcomes. And then we've also, as we've been growing, whilst we've been testing out different hypotheses, we've benefited by being part of the Making More Health program, through Boehringer, providing funding so that we can test certain and validate certain hypotheses. That's basically how we've managed. And as I look for through to the next 7 or 8 months, when I realize that's actually what our runway is going to afford us, it's been a tough year trying to find new capital. Despite our existing investors saying, we're fully in support of you for our Series B, it's been hard finding new capital, and therefore that's why my sympathies are with others who are out there, because I'm sure if we're finding it tough, it must be really, really hard for others who are, may not have been so fortuitous as we were during our Series A.
Okay, thanks, Sawan. To the audience, please post your questions in the chat. I'll get to them as soon as I can, or try and answer as many as I possibly can. Sarah, if I come to you now, in the old days for the pharma industry, healthcare companies didn't do the stuff you guys are doing in the J&J venture. They didn't invest in entrepreneurs and that kind of stuff. What's different about what J&J is doing in healthcare in Africa, and why is this something that you've chosen to be part of?
Well, I think it's a mix of internal and then macroeconomic dynamics, right? I think the first is that the desire to make impact, and do good work in, the global South, let's call it, or other, beyond primary markets like the US, let's say, for an American-based company has always been there, right? So it's just been the way it gets executed gets more and more sophisticated over time. And that's not just because people inside of J&J decide, okay, let's be more sophisticated about it. I think there is a bit of that. Although I would say, if you talk about catalytic capital within a Johnson & Johnson environment, there's only a handful of people who really understand what you're talking about still. So I wouldn't say we've really, really reached a tipping point there either. It's still an education process for large corporations like us who are really focused on doing good in healthcare, right? But have primarily got a background in R&D and product development. I mean, Johnson & Johnson is a product development company at its heart. So these kinds of things are always going to be, coming alongside the core business, right? Okay, like what is that? How do we get it in, how do we get more involved? And how do we understand what role Johnson & Johnson can play? And then I also think from a macroeconomic perspective, if you think about the corporate environment with this lens, doing impact finance or philanthropic grant making or social good really also came with this whole, what used to be CSR, which is now ESG. And then ESG kind of gets, written up in The Economist recently as like a whole bunch of, this won't last either, right? And for me, I don't really care what the acronym is, right? Let's just call it the SDGs are what matter. And then, the corporate acronyms about what people need to care about from a shareholder's perspective or a management board piece, those acronyms are going to continue to change. I don't care what the heck we want to call it. But the desire or the mandate now, it's becoming more of a mandate, impact weighted accounts. We take it for granted that like GAAP accounting was not always a thing, right? It came around, I think, Sawan, you know probably better than me as a finance expert here, but like in the 1950s, maybe. And everybody uses that now to report their financials. So impact weighted accounts, I think, will also become a thing, and it will become the new sort of side to GAAP accounting. And companies are going to have to say, hey, what did you actually do with your impact weighted accounts? And how are you going to report your numbers on that, not just your IR/PR messaging? And so when that starts to get embedded in businesses, capital flows, right? It's fact, capital will flow. And so, that I think is becoming more and more of a topic. I mean, I've been in the public health impact finance space now for under 2 years. And the pull that I have seen in the last 6 to 8 months, even, for more participation, for more conversation from the private sector, the number of tools coming out that are trying to look to support this agenda, I mean, has gone up exponentially. And I do really also see this is a very exciting time if you are a solution seeker. If you're a person who does really well with seemingly complex problems and coming up with solutions to try to address them and really redirecting efforts, resources, capital, attention to them, there is no better place to be than obviously, Frank, the space that you're discussing right now. And so I find it a super exciting time, which I know, maybe sounds a bit superficial actually as it comes out of my mouth. But the reality is if I can help, if in the position I'm in, I can help create opportunities to redirect capital to appropriately solve for some of these, challenges that we face in a way that allows for the solution to be sustained on the ground for a long period of time, then I've really done a good job. And that's what I wake up thinking about. That's what I want to get after. And if I can use any of my experiences, network, people, or talent to get after solutions in that space, that's what I want to do. So for me, that's an exciting time because I do feel like then, your skill sets are actually being putting to use or something that really has a need, but also has a lot of momentum. So it's a nice convergence period. COVID helped accelerate that. I see great examples now of the use of telesurgery and telemedicine, helping to support capacity building. We just did, the biggest deal I just did was the largest contribution our J&J Foundation has ever made was 15 million to Africa Frontline First. We are putting money into frontline healthcare workers. And Sawan, you mentioned, like, we hear this on the ground, right? When I asked folks, I made a recent visit in the surgical facility in Uganda and said, okay, what's the biggest challenge? Well, we don't have enough, anesthetists or anesthesiologists. Okay, great. When was the last bolus that you had? When a scholarship program was offered? Like, that's it. That's the answer. And now we had more trained people and now we actually can do the job. I mean, how difficult is that? There's, we really do have to build that local capacity. And I think there's a lot of people that are really pushing hard on that agenda now and trying to make it fit for purpose for local solutions. So, yeah, that's what I see now, but I wouldn't say it's core yet to any large multinational, but it's growing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Sarah. I totally agree with you. I think we're all working through that phase of mainstreaming impact investing, so that impact is not this thing that you think about when you've done everything else. You think about it as you're doing everything else. And that's a big part of what we're all trying to do. So, I'm glad to hear you say that even terms like catalytic capital are not so familiar with everyone within J&J. It's the same everywhere. And that's why we are trying to do all these capacity building programs and training programs like the Healthcare Funders Forum. I don't know if you knew this, but if you wanted to do an impact or innovative financing program in Africa with an African university, you have one choice. 54 countries, we have only one university in the whole continent that offers a program on innovative finance. Yet we're the biggest global market in the world, impact market in the world. It baffles me that it's almost the equivalent of having only one car manufacturer in the US, which is the biggest car market in the world. Those are the things we need to be solving. So as AVPA, we're very actively trying to do this stuff. We're working on a really exciting program with a group called the Impact and Sustainable Finance Consortium faculty to capacitate 40 African business schools in that space, and be able to enable them to set up their own departments of impact and sustainable finance on the continent. So we can do a lot more training, research, policy support, and we'll move Africa from zero to the continent with the most number of business schools teaching this subject, because rightly so we should be. And right now we have one university that teaches it. It's totally shocking. So efforts like what you're doing right now are really appreciated. And so we appreciate the leadership that companies like J&J are demonstrating in helping us as a continent move forward. But it's all about doing a little bits at the right time, and we'll all add to the bigger body of knowledge as we go along. I wanted to see if we can take some more questions. So please post questions in the chat. I have two more questions for the panelists before I can field any questions from the audience. So for both Sawan and Sarah, I'm starting with you, Sawan. Why is this forum important for you? Is it coming at the right time? Why do you want to be part of this forum? And then I'll go to Sarah.
I think the long and short is it is coming at exactly the right time, because ultimately we are on the cusp of our Series B and we need to raise funding. And for me, what's really, really important is that we managed to do it the right way. Series A, we did really well. We have such a stellar bunch of investors who are just behind us. And I want to make sure that it's the right form of capital that propels us to the next level, because, the worst bit of news would be having kind of investors coming in with different views about where we should be in 5-6 years time, or not having a view that this is a long game and it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. So it's coming in big, and is really, really important from a very personal and from a company perspective, because ultimately if we are going to get to 15 hospitals from 3, we need our Series B round to be closed and pretty quickly. So I'm hoping that can take place.
Awesome. And just before Sarah answer the same question in response to why the forum is important and what she's looking forward to. Sawan, if you are talking to other healthcare investors, or other both investors and entrepreneurs, what advice would you give them about being part of the forum?
Good question. I think the opportunity from an investor landscape is that you can hear probably the challenges that are actually on the ground in a bit more of a holistic, or actually in a bit less of a holistic manner. You're actually kind of hearing from a whole bunch of people about the challenges that may be actually on the ground, from startups and social entrepreneurs. It, number one, gives you hopefully a forum to be able to interact with funders, but also, leveraging upon the case studies that Mark is talking about when this forum actually starts. I think that would be really, really important, because ultimately you might just, as a leave alone the social piece, but as an entrepreneur, you kind of get to be like, huh, that's really, really interesting. Let's kind of work on that and see where that takes us, right? And anybody who happens to say that they're an entrepreneur should totally take that up and kind of leverage the case studies that will be presented, or any sort of other examples that they can tease out from other social impact entrepreneurs who are working in maybe even different spaces to what they're doing. So I think that it provides immense value from both sides.
Thank you, Sawan. Sarah, your thoughts as well. Why, is this the right time for the forum? And your thoughts about what are you looking forward to most being part of the forum?
Yeah, I think it's a great time for the forum. I mean, from where I sit, a lot of the things that come in my inbox generally still had a historical, like a multilateral led convening forum. And although those are good, they miss the point on, this is an African-led convened forum, and that I really like. So that's number one, the attractiveness of this. I feel like it's a bit more grounded in reality and with the needs that are most present. The other piece I think is that the opportunities that I see also, on the agenda of cross-industry sector folks is always healthcare and education. So even when you're looking to source capital, if you're doing something that has, let's say, a supply chain solution, you can look to capital coming from large supply chain players that may have nothing to do with the healthcare sector, that are still very interested in making, let's call it SDG related healthcare investments or grant making facilities. There is capital out there waiting to find good solutions. So we need to think beyond the traditional channels of healthcare only. And this kind of a forum, I think, is also great for convening a lot of different sectors against the healthcare challenge, and creating that sort of platform for people to come together and discuss what they're working on and align capital that way. And it is also bringing awareness. Again, I think, in these, as you were talking about, Frank, the education that's still needed around impact finance and how that's growing. I do see massive representation globally in the forums where I sit, where we're talking about impact finance, but still not enough African representation in those forums. And, my job at the moment really is focused on 100% the African continent. So that's what I'm looking for. That's where I want to help support and figure out how to use all the capital tools we have to address some of these challenges. So yeah, I think it's perfect timing.
Yeah, you talk about a massive underrepresentation of Africans in these spaces. So one of the things that also flabbergasted me is that this consortium I'm talking to you about, that is a group of about 95 global business schools that are teaching impact and sustainable finance. I've just put a link in the chat. One of the joys of being part of that consortium is that all the curriculum is made open source and all the research is made open source. And in this consortium is the likes of Harvard, UK, Yale, Stanford, the usual suspects. The sad thing that there's not a single African business school in that consortium. So people are discussing issues around impact on this continent, and we're not having a voice on the table. And we've got to find voices and seats around the table. That's why I think the work that we're doing around this forum is not just about what we're going to do as a journey of growth together, but we're going to be a body that will be identifiable, that people who want to come and discuss African healthcare will be thinking about the first port of call being the Africa Healthcare Funders Forum. And I think this is a really good place for us to get started and get going. Sawan and Sarah, I'm going to come back to you with some closing remarks. But before then, I want Abu to run two quick polls, just Slido polls, to get some more final feedback from the audience. But just if you can just think about your closing remarks, I think that would be really great. And as Abu is pulling those Slido polls up, to Innocent, your question around how can we leverage on such forum to redesign the domestic resource mobilization strategies, this is exactly what the forum is going to be about. Is how do we find Afro-unique or Afro-designed resource mobilization strategies? How do we leverage and crowd in more local private capital and not reduce dependence on foreign capital? How do we leverage the grant capital in this process? So this is exactly what the forum benefits will look like. But in the meantime, if you can please just take the next 30 seconds to respond to the question on the screen. If you don't have a slide or on your phone or something, you can simply put your answer in the chat. We'll take that as well. But just we want to get a sense of what sector are you, what part of healthcare are you part of within the audience? Oh, funny. The other thing I wanted to mention that the Healthcare Funders Forum is also open to people in the veterinary sciences. So if you have any people in your network who are part of veterinary services, please let them know about the forum. This is all part of what you're trying to support and advance. Okay, Abu, let's just see what the final poll looks like. Okay, a lot of people in health service delivery. It's good to see a lot of people in health tech as well. If you're in other, can you just put in the chat what part of other you're part of, so we can get a sense of what you're doing. But it's quite clear a lot of people and health service delivery. Okay, excellent. Abu, let's take the next poll, and then I will start off with you, Sawan, in terms of your closing remarks, and then I'll wrap up with Sarah. So, having listened to Sawan and Sarah, what do you think? Who should be addressing the gaps we're seeing? We'll take another 30 seconds. And please, if you can't use the app, feel free to put your responses in the chat. Okay, I think this is speaks a bit credit to the panelists. You've got your message across. We need more private sector participation in healthcare, and it seems like the audience agrees with you that we should have a lot more private sector capital coming into the healthcare space. So that's good to see that you've had some influence in terms of how people have thought through healthcare financing going forward. So to the audience, Sarah, Sawan, let's start with you, Sawan, first of all. Maybe just a minute to your closing remarks, and then Sarah, and then I'll hand over to Nancy.
Right, thanks, Frank. I think I came into this this call a little bit less optimistic than I am feeling right now leaving it. It took me a moment to reflect upon the reality of the matter that maybe in 2017, a stroke of luck was what was needed in order to get access to capital. But number one, it feels like in 2022 post-COVID era that we have the likes of plenty more institutions who are there to possibly provide entrepreneurs like the many who have joined this call with the opportunity to be able to fail and fail frequently in order to get to where they need to, which is ultimately success in providing the social impact and also hopefully growing their business. So it makes me much more optimistic right now. And just having heard Sarah, thanks for that. I kind of what I needed on a Thursday morning in cold Nairobi right now to make me feel like actually there are layers of support and it's growing. So the message is that if there are more accessible capital out there, it's on all of us as social entrepreneurs to try and find it, and that the message is that it's clearly a lot more than what it was before. And it doesn't need to just go down the traditional routes of equity finance or debt. And there's a lot more philanthropic capital that can actually enable us to make mistakes. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sawan. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, also just wanted to say I appreciate the invite to be on the panel today, and reading all of the comments and the questions on the side also gives you a pulse. So on, back at you. It was really good to hear your story and what you're looking to do. And I've got in the back of my head now for our purposes about where you are and your time and your runway. I've got it. So message received. And I think, what we're doing here is we're at the convening phase. And Frank, that's what you're being. You're being a massive convener of folks getting around the table to talk about the use of impact capital, talk about how we can bring different pieces of capital together to get after some of these objectives. And that's the phase where impact capital is. Everybody right now should be acting as a convener and talking about, what kinds of solutions we have. And it is still a very mixed market and it's not a mature market. But, neither is carbon finance, for example, and that's been around, I think, at least 20 years. It's still a little bit of a wild, wild west, but a marketplace is growing. And, we can actually also look at, some of the solutions that I look at are, I'm trying to figure out how to combine carbon finance with healthcare financing, like solarized healthcare facilities. I mean, let's use what we've got in our tool, that's local to us, let's think about things differently. Let's not just think about going out to raise venture capital, but what do we have in our toolbox that's unique to the environment that we're trying to serve? And look at capital solutions that really align with that. And then I actually think we'll start to make some progress. So really enjoyed the conversation here today and look forward to staying connected.
Fantastic. And Sawan, we take our hats off people like you who commit their lives to finding solutions to nagging problems on the continent. You are the people who are really at the coalface of trying to make our lives better. And we do want to thank you for the commitment you've taken of your life to drive solutions of this nature, reduce maternal mortality, and make lives better, basically, for the broader African healthcare space. And so long as you're failing forward, Sawan, we'll try and see how we can support you to keep going. There's always a lot of learnings in every failure. And, people say behind every overnight success is 20 years of failure and tribulation. So we're really glad of you. And Sarah, you really are representative of the kind of investor we're looking for, the kind of mindset we want to be coming to this space. We're hoping that we can learn and also teach you what other, and within the broader forum, what others are doing. This will be a very collaborative space. So that's what really excites me about these things, that we're all in the learning process of this. AVP is also doing a couple other things. We are going to be running a catalytic investment training for grant makers later. So I put a link in there for you guys to take a look at that. But I'm very happy to have gotten here. So looking forward to the forum. Mark and Social Innovation Circle and Ashoka and Boringa Ingelheim and Making More Health. Thank you so much for the support to make this possible. And over to Nancy and to the audience, thank you so much for staying. Nancy has one or two things you want to tell you before we close, but you've been a great audience to stay till the very end. Really appreciate it.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, thank you so much, Sawan and Sarah. It's just been really, really informative, great discussion. I wish we had more time, but I will be reaching out to Sawan and to get you to sign up onto our DealShare platform. So I'll be reaching out to you later. Thank you to the audience. Wonderful questions, a lot of great insight. I think mine is really just to say thanks to all our supporters, Social Innovation Circle, Boringa Ingelheim, and Ashoka, but also to highlight the quickly approaching deadline for the forum. Anybody who wants to apply for the forum, the deadline is 21st September. And I think we have a slide showing some of the people who have already signed up for the forum. You can see there some of the funders who will be participating in the forum. We've got quite a good list, but we didn't want to show everybody here today. And we have some of the capital seekers also on that slide who will be joining us, including Sawan. Sarah also will be joining us as one of our experts. So thank you so much. I think there's one other slide, Abu, that we wanted to show. Yes, we also have, I think Frank mentioned it earlier on, but we have a program coming up. Deadline to apply for this is the 23rd of September. This is SDG Impact Standards, specifically designed for corporates. And AVPA is rolling this program out in conjunction with UNDP. So we thank UNDP for helping us to roll this program out. So on that note, thank you so much to everyone. Have a wonderful day. And we look forward to engaging with all of you, or most of you at least, during the forum. Thank you.